You guys may or may not remember, depending on whether or not you watched the latest video which shot last week, but in that video I not only talked about James Lee and went over his character, but I mentioned how I wanted to cover Kitae Kim as well, who I currently believe to be James Lee's counterpart, not just narratively, and by that I mean the role they both take up for the future of Lookism, but also strength-wise. In today's video I'm gonna be doing exactly that. Kitae Kim is one of the few distinct characters in Lookism that is shaped up to be damn near exactly what we thought he would be as the audience, with the only deviations in character that we can't really say we expected being things that exceeded our expectations, with how brutal the man is and how straight to the point and blunt the guy seems to be being two great examples. He's a character that's been anticipated for years now, and I don't say that lightly because I have chapter reviews on this channel, one of which I recall vividly, in which I was getting excited over Taejin hyping up Kitae's supposed return to the main stage or his supposed first appearance in the series, that which happened in chapter 496 indirectly as it was just a flashback, but an appearance nonetheless. Said appearance being him showing up, fraudulizing Ji Chang, if that's even a word, making one of the first generation's strongest figures seem like child's play, eliminating a couple police officers, and then flying his way back to Mexico after rejecting James's offer to pass him the title of the first generation king of Seoul. Kitae's ambitions have always been a lot more complex than he himself makes them out to be, because all he really tells us is that he wants to return everything as it was in the past, to the time when Gaprion Kim drove out to Yamazaki and broke up Gaprion Kim's fist gang to begin his political career. Not only his ambitions, but he himself as a character has always been relatively puzzling to us readers, which brings me to the first real point of comparison I'd like to make between Kitae and James, which is that PTJ has had big plans for these two men for what has now become pretty clear to us a long ass time, and in order to keep their characters ambiguous to us, he introduces them in seemingly contradictory ways, which aren't actually contradictory, but they appear that way to us initially until we understand what these two actually want. One of the first actual interactions we've seen between Kitae and a character in the series was not entirely authentic, as it wasn't actually Kitae Kim, it was Jin Young talking to Jake Kim, who he thought was actually Kitae. Regardless though, it gave us a lot of information at the time. We had been given hints here and there that Kitae resented his father Gaprion, the reason not being entirely given to us, but when Jin Young mentioned Kitae killing his father and then seemingly attempting to imitate him not for the first time in front of Jin Young, with him stating he was still struggling desperately and saying he'd never be Gaprion Kim, it was slightly confusing, but when you read between the lines it becomes clear that PTJ has been hinting at it from the start. Kitae is trying to replace Gaprion Kim. He's trying to be the Gaprion that never went into politics, the Gaprion that loved chaos and didn't try to stop it, the Gaprion that only wanted one thing, which is not to be the best of both worlds as James now does, but just to be the strongest physically. Kitae, as I mentioned earlier, is James Lee's counterpart. I'm not sure if I said this in last week's video, my memory's failing me, but just in case I didn't, I'll say it here again. I believe James and Kitae are trying to be the same person for two different purposes. When Gaprion was killed, he was killed by Elite, who Gun portrays as the man who chose himself and did not care for those around him, with Elite even offering to kill off his own daughter for Gun to work under him. Elite was working towards being the replacement for Gaprion Kim. However, Elite had already studied Gaprion's character, and with that comes learning from his mistakes. If Elite were to take the same exact path as Gaprion, he would never end up replacing him, because Gaprion took a direct path that left him with no middle ground. He either succeeded as a politician and continued to leave everything behind and abandon the underworld in order to prioritize the bigger picture, or the bigger world in this scenario, and his friends, or he failed miserably, was not accepted and ended up being overshadowed. Unfortunately for Gaprion Kim, the latter was the case and he failed as a politician. Elite, learning from this, decided it wasn't exactly in his reach to become the best of both worlds, especially considering the generation he prospered in had ended and it was time for the first generation. He decided he would prioritize his political position and try to become the best at that, whilst manipulating those under him in the generations to come, Gun being the first, an individual who never broke free from Charles Choi's shackles up until the man died. Gu followed Gun, and he was one of the few who came to the realization that there was no benefit from working under Elite, because at the end of the day all they were doing was becoming the best of the first world for Elite, that being the strongest in terms of fighting prowess, as if Elite was the most advantageous politically and the strongest in terms of fighting prowess, by having Gu, Gun, James and Kitae under him, he would be unstoppable. Gu realized this and he decided that unlike Gun, dedicating his life to Charles Choi was not the path he wanted to go down, and he tried to bring Gun with him, but Gun had already been far gone. Why am I mentioning this? I'm mentioning this because of something I went over in my last video, which is that when Elite wanted to take down Gaprion Kim, he may have learned from his mistakes, but he never took into account his own. He never considered that maybe if you want to be the best of both worlds, you have to consider a third possibility in which you yourself would be overshadowed. For Gaprion, this was the second possibility. He would be overshadowed, and he was, as I mentioned earlier. For Elite, it was the third, and it was one he never thought of. He never thought to himself, what if becoming the strongest in terms of fighting prowess requires me and me only to be the strongest, not someone else to do it for me? What if the people that work under me, who are truly the strongest, are the ones who end up overshadowing me? They may be protecting me from those who want to take my spot, but if they're the ones who want to take my spot, what do I do? It's something that Elite never considered, save for one time. He knew James Lee would eventually try to betray him, so in hopes of escaping this outcome, he attempted to train and Daniel. None of this worked out though, for the sake of Lookism having a deep plot, I presume. So Elite sent James and he sent Kitae, and he may have sent other people we don't know about yet, but for now he sent these two young men to rid of Gaprion Kim without considering the possibility that they wanted to replace him and had their own ambitions just like Elite. And this leads me to finally go over Kitae's character, as in the last video I mentioned the James part of this situation, where James decided to pursue becoming the Gaprion that actually succeeded at being the best of both worlds, both fighting prowess and politics wise, which is why he is currently pursuing the latter. Unfortunately for James Lee though, the biggest obstacle that lies in his way is Kitae Kim. Does Kitae Kim really have to be an obstacle though? I mean, think about it. In the latest chapter, that being 556, we got our confirmation that Kitae and James are still allied, working together, and apparently have a big joint plan. So does Kitae Kim really have to be an obstacle for James Lee? In my opinion, it could go both ways. The first scenario that always comes to mind, especially to a Lookism reader, is that Kitae Kim is going to betray James Lee or vice versa. This is because this would likely end up in them fighting, which of course everyone would like to see. And if this were to be the case, the roles I think both James and Kitae would take up are yin and yang. James, having fully locked in on pursuing politics, would attempt to take Kitae down from an ideological and political standpoint, exposing his truth to the masses and giving himself a more advantageous position. For Kitae Kim, I think he represents the fighting prowess branch, where he's more inclined to brute force his way through everything as he usually does when in character, attempting to take James Lee down by simply punching and kicking him enough. The problem here though lies in the fact that, as I mentioned previously, James Lee does not want to be someone whom you can merely kick and punch to take down. He wants to be the best of both worlds, and that requires both taking him down physically and ideologically. Another problem I have with this is that if James were to truly be the final obstacle for Daniel, as I mentioned, he would have to push Daniel to the extreme in both worlds, trying to take him down the same way Kitae would try to take James down if they were against each other, both politically or ideologically and physically. That would end up in James literally being the strongest physically and the most authoritative, making Kitae a pointless, fruitless character. This is why I think it's more likely that Kitae and James stay under an alliance and take up the position of counterparts for each other that sort of complete each other as a duo. Gaprion attempted to do it all alone but failed to someone wanting to replace him, and if someone wants to replace you, especially if they're younger or if they have more time on their hands, they more than likely eventually will, at least in terms of Lookism. It's what happened with Charles Choi as well. James and Kitae, though having both acknowledged the fact that they both need each other for their plans, are more than likely gonna stay allied and divide the whole plan of being the best of both worlds amongst each other. When I say James is trying to be Gaprion or Kitae is trying to be Gaprion, I'm not saying one wants to merely be the strongest fighting prowess wise and the other wants to be the strongest politics wise or whatnot, the most authoritative per se, because Gaprion didn't want to be just the strongest or just the most authoritative. He wanted to be both, and only wanting to be one wouldn't make you Gaprion or even close to Gaprion, and that's the whole reason Elite failed, as I mentioned earlier. If you want to be Gaprion, or at least the Gaprion that succeeded, you have to be both, and in order to avoid being replaced by one another, James and Kitae put their combined strengths to use in order to both collectively be the Gaprion that never failed, the Gaprion that succeeded at mastering both fighting and politics. James takes up the politics part as he's gotten rusty self-admittedly, and is seemingly becoming tired of fighting the same way Gaprion did, and is looking for something bigger. With Kitae, he takes up the fighting prowess part as he admittedly resents Gaprion for going into politics and wants no part in that. However, he knows that just fighting prowess alone won't get him nowhere. It won't make him the Gaprion that succeeded, hence he admits he needs James for his plan and allies with him. This is also why I think as of right now, James Lee is going to be the most influential figure in all of Lookism, while Kitae is simply going to be the strongest. One controls politics and keeps the other safe from any troubles of that nature, and the other becomes the strongest and gathers an army to become both the king of the underworld and protect the other from any troubles in that nature, such as someone trying to take James Lee's spot strength-wise. Kitae and James may have their own ambitions, which does add a whole lot of spice to Lookism and makes it so much more of an interesting story, but I do believe that at least as of right now, there's a pretty big possibility that James and Kitae are in pursuit of achieving their own dreams, planning on together becoming the Gaprion that truly was the best of both worlds, the Gaprion that was never overshadowed. This both makes for an extremely interesting story, but also a picture-perfect villain for someone like Daniel Park, the main character along with all of his allies, to have to eventually take down. James Lee has always been around, but he's been waiting for Kitae Kim's return as he needs him for his plan, and without him, he can't fully get to where exactly he needs to be. And with Kitae finally here and Lookism's main antagonist being fully built up, I truly believe Kitae Kim is what's reviving Lookism. If you want a more detailed breakdown of the fighting prowess of both James Lee and Kitae Kim, both from a narrative and feat standpoint, and who I believe would win between the two, stay tuned for the future, because although there's a scenario that James and Kitae stay allied, it's also extremely important to note that James wants a society with no evil, and Kitae wants the opposite. Their means through which they get to their purpose is the same, but their ambitions and actual purpose collide, which is why I think it's a possibility they betray each other as well. Anyway, that's for a future video. I'm not gonna yap too much now. Peace.